I'm Susan Muldoon. I'm with the School of Public Health and Information Sciences. I'm here to, along with James Sims, here to introduce Dr. Arnetta Arno. Arnetta Arno, PhD, MPH, is the director for the Center for Health Equity for the Louisville Metro Department of Public Health and Wellness. Dr. Arno earned her PhD in urban planning from the University of, is that Reading or Reading? Reading. Berkshire, England, and a Master of Public Health from Columbia University Mailman School of Public Health in New York City. She holds dual international urban planning credentials, is a member of the Royal Town Planning Institute, United Kingdom, and a certified planner in the U.S. Dr. Arno is internationally trained and experienced in public health, community engagement, and urban planning. Immediately prior to assuming leadership of the center in January of 2011, Dr. Arno worked as a public health consultant, focused on operationalizing health equity practice within both public health and healthcare sectors. In 2009, she launched a major strategic leadership and organizational cultural change initiative for the Louisville Department of Health and Wellness Center for Health Equity, where she was charged with the design, development, and implementation to drive I'm not going to be able to say it.
Operationalization.
Thank you. Of health equity practice. She was appointed project director, Health Equity Planning Collaborative, Jewish Hospital and St. Mary's Healthcare in summer of 2009. James?
Dr. Arno's work emphasizes the application of learning organization principles, capacity building, and community-based participatory research and practice. Additional experience and past appointments have included visiting assistant professor, urban policy and planning, University of Louisville consultant director, community growth and development, Greater Louisville director, community economic development, TARP Light Rail Project, and executive director, Community Resource Network of Louisville, Kentucky. For more than a decade, Dr. Arno has utilized her talents in multiple ways in service to the Louisville community, including the Cornerstone 2020 Mobility Committee, Board of Directors, New Directors Housing Corporation, Project Director, African American Strategic Planning Group, Metro United Way Vital Neighborhoods Committee, Western Louisville Economic Alliance Advisory Board, Leadership of Louisville, and Kentuckiana Girl Scouts Troop co-leader. She was recognized with an outstanding Community Service Appreciation Award by the Louisville Defender newspaper in October 2011. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Arnetta Arno.
Hello, everybody. That was a very long and probably and I appreciate it very much. But I think what it probably points out more than anything else, and I was just speaking to our community treasurer right here, Tom Moffett, that I'm a recent, or college recent. I've always done public health, but it's relatively recently that I've started actually practicing it. And as he said to me, he just realized that public health has a lot to do with all the things he cares about. And in fact, that's why I'm in public health, because it's occurred to me that all the things I've cared about, including urban planning, when you connect all the dots, the best place for me to be is actually in public health. And so even when we talked about the speakers we heard this morning, I could hear dots being connected for me, even when Russ started talking about his experience in other parts of the world. You can probably hear from my accent that I was not born in the U.S. I've lived in Guyana in South America for about a third of my life. I've lived in England, and I've lived here for about another third. So it's been a growth experience for me. I've learned a lot along the way. And so even getting into injury and violence as a public health issue, and particularly being asked about peace, and you kind of, okay, what are we going to say about peace? I think Dr. Free mentioned this morning he doesn't often have a chance to talk about peace. Neither do I. But it's frequently a part of the work that we do all the time, but we don't necessarily recognize it as such. And so I'm going to do a little bit of didactic work and kind of going back to what is public health and how do we see it, and it kind of talks about through a lens, through that public health lens. I'm going to get to the objective of where do we go from here, because that is really critical in the work that we do. But I'm going to start from the 50,000-foot level. I'm not going to kind of go back to the picture that Russ gave us where we couldn't even see the world. But I thought we could start with what the World Health Organization, what their definition of violence is. So it's the intentional use of physical force or power, threatened or actual, against oneself, another person, or against a group or community that either results in or has a high likelihood of resulting in injury, death, psychological harm, and maldevelopment or deprivation. So it's a very broad definition, and I think it's a really good one as a starting point as we think about it. So for the world as a whole, so we're still up there, we look at these numbers, there are 1.5 million people dying as a result of violence every year. That is a lot of people. 1.5 million deaths annually. And then when you look at the numbers in terms of where it happens, 35% of them are homicides. 12% are wars. So we talked this morning about war and how it relates to this. And a full 52% are suicide. So that surprises you, right? And then when you look at that, so those are the people who have actually died. It's tenfold more in terms of the people who are affected. 16 million non-fatal violent incidents cause people to require medical treatment in the world every year, approximately. So it's a lot of us affected by violence. And those are the people who need medical treatment. There are a lot of psychological and emotional harm that is caused that we may not be kind of, taking into the hospital. So we don't get counted. So it's a big problem. Here is how we could look at the typology of violence. And again, this is the World Health Organization, and you can see it falling into three real pods. So the self-harm, this is the self-inflicted. So we think of it, when we think about it, we don't really think about it, but that's a big part. That's the suicide. It's suicide, it's self-abuse, and then there's this other axis here. So there's physical violence, sexual violence, psychological, and deprivation. This is the sins of omission, so to speak. The things that we cause people by not sharing, by depriving kids, and all of those, that's where this deprivation piece comes in. So suicide and self-abuse, either for children or partners, and then it happens in families. There's the interpersonal. We talk about that more than anything else. That's what the media tells us about. One of the programs we worked on this summer, we took some kids to Fox 41, and one of the things they learned was, if it bleeds, it leads. So we hear about all the things that are violence, and we hear about it being a quote-unquote West End problem, because that's the way it's perceived in the media. But when you look at the numbers, we may actually tell a different kind of a story, and it may actually point us in a different kind of direction in terms of what solutions we might try to find. And so at the far end, you have the collective violence, and that's really the kind of politics, political, terrorism, and all of those other things. That's the war piece. And even when I started this, it didn't even occur to me that there is a peace caucus as part of the American Public Health Association. So it's something that I'm going to follow up. Now I've got a new mission of connecting more dots of the work that I need to be doing. But it really started off in talking about wars and talking about the impact of wars, and clearly the World Health Organization numbers seem to suggest that it's really a critical part of it. What we hear about, and what I'm going to talk about, is probably more of this and less about this, but we just know it's out there. And so I just wanted to bring that up as another way of looking about it. In public health, we also talk about the socio-ecological model. So we talk about the individual, and the last presenter talked about what happens between two people where we're trying to mediate. But that person is a part of a family. They're in relationship with family. They're in relationship with community, and they're in relationship with society. So even when there was this discussion of could we transfer what happens in New Zealand to the US, what is going to be acceptable in terms of our societal norms? Is it going to be transferable? What do we think? Are we thinking mostly in the terms of retribution and those kinds of solutions as anything else? So the socio-ecological model forces us, and particularly in public health, we're not talking about the individual, we're talking about community health. And therefore we really need to think about the individual in context. So here we are, the public health approach, therefore, is interdisciplinary. And I like the omnidisciplinary approach. It's like the omnipresent, I think. That was the other kind of word that it provoked for me. So, interdisciplinary is really important. So it draws knowledge from multiple disciplines, medicine, epidemiology, all of these things. And it really kind of goes back to why I'm in public health. The Center for Health Equity focuses on the social determinants of health primarily. And as I'll show you later, much of what is health is not what we traditionally think of as health. It's outside of health care in the traditional sense. So it allows us to be innovative and look at a whole lot of things beyond that. We take 4 major steps. We move from the problem to the solution. First of all, we think about what is the problem, define the problem. So I started you off with the data. What does this data look like? We think about what are the causes and the correlations and the risks. We explore how to prevent it. So we try some pilots. So we saw an example of a pilot earlier about restorative justice and how that work is coming along, and we need to collect more data. So that's a good public health, a good science-based approach to the solution. And before we get to this point, and even when we get to this point, we start looking at how that solution works in different settings. We try to collect the information, and then we also look at the cost effectiveness. So I'll show you some data later that shows that as a community, we spend a lot of money on violence that we could be reinvesting upstream as opposed to downstream with incarceration and those kinds of solutions that we traditionally live for. I'm going to skip this slide because I think I've talked about most of it, just in the interest of time. The other thing that we do in public health is think about prevention in a stratified forum. We look at it in terms of primary prevention, approaches that are aimed to prevent violence before it occurs. So that's called primary prevention. It's called going upstream to find the root of the problem, to try to find the cause, and fix the cause so that we're not treating the symptoms at the end. The next is secondary prevention. So that's the immediate response. Somebody's just got shot or there's something like that. We take them to the hospital, we patch them up, and we send them along their way. That's the immediate response. What systems do we have in place? And then there's tertiary prevention. What is the long-term care in terms of violence? But this is after it's happened. So it's after the person has been affected. What do we do in terms of healing them and the long-term impact? And you'll see, I'll show you again what all of these things mean in terms of what our solutions might tell us about. So going back to the big picture and the World Health Organization and the data, they have actually most of the data suggests that there are probably 7 evidence-based strategies that kind of tend to work in most environments, and this came out of a report in 2009. So developing safe, stabling, and nurturing relationships between children, parents, families, and caregivers. So we're really going back to when we looked at that ecological model, remember I talked about relationships? That is clearly important. Then developing life skills for children and adolescents, how to solve problems, conflict resolution, those kinds of things. Reducing the availability and harmful use of alcohol. One of the first things when I came to Louisville, and before I even went to some parts of Louisville, and I was a professor here at UofL, there was discussion about, we're writing a grant, and this is how we're going to get the money. It's by writing up, there's a preponderance of liquor stores, pawn shops, and those kinds of things. It was a way to get money by putting out this data. But it wasn't necessarily looking to solve the problem. It was really just using it as a way to kind of identify neighborhoods that are challenged. Reducing access to guns, another important part. And you'll see why that's important. Most people think about it mostly in the vein of violent crime. But there are more guns killing people in terms of, and you'll see suicides, etc., than they are in terms of what people think that they're holding that gun to protect themselves. They're probably more likely to use it on themselves or somebody close to them than to somebody that they theoretically are going to defend themselves against. So the other one is promoting gender equity, and we've heard some of that in the discussion today. Changing the cultural norms that support violence, and victim identification, care, and support. So the restorative justice piece that we heard earlier fits right within some of those evidence-based things, but we need to find solutions that are appropriate to our particular community. So we've talked about the big picture, But as a planner, I always think of, you've all heard that, think global, act local. And I actually had, that was my response, because I was charged to, so what are you going to do? Where do we go from here? I thought about that, and then when I looked up, I realized, oops, sorry. I realized that it was a planner who first came up with that kind of notion, a British planner, a British town planner. So in fact, my first undergraduate degree is in town planning. I had to translate that to become an urban planner when I moved here, but it's just a kind of linguistic kind of a thing. But it's really talking about local character and what builds local character. It's not an accident. It's really as a multiplicity of things that cause local circumstance to exist. So the notion of looking at things in an ecological model is very much part of my roots in terms of my training, and I've since been translating that into public health. So here we are, we're taking it now to the local. As it turns out, we all, those who live here, know about what we experienced here in Louisville that really kicked off some community conversations about violence on May the 17th. We had actually started at the Center for Health Equity looking in March and April under a grant and working with NACHO in terms of looking at injury and violence and our capacity assessment tool and seeing how we could make that work happen. In the middle of all of that, I had a plan, you know, I'm a planner. I had a plan that we would do a phase 1, we would do this thing, and then phase 2, we would figure out what our solution would be, and phase 3, we would go big with the program. In the middle of all of that, the May 17 shootings in West Louisville happened, and then all of a sudden there was a lot of discussion. What are we going to do? The mayor, of course, launched this task force, which is still running. We've just completed, and I'll show you some of that work shortly, in terms of the solutions that are coming out or recommendations for that. But we also had some funding that we figured we needed to start doing something that was beyond the traditional approaches, and that was the Healing Futures Fellowship class of 2012. So very quickly, my office, and in close collaboration with Dr. Nesbitt, who's the director of the department, the whole Department of Public Health and Wellness, along with the mayor's office, etc., launched this Healing Futures Fellowship. And the vision for that was to get a group of 25 young people, representative of all sectors of our community. So we had about 160 applicants. We chose young people between the ages of 15 and 19 who were, in terms of diverse, in terms of race, class, culture, schools. There was public and private school. And we put them all together to have this fellowship program that was full-time for 6 weeks. And it wasn't simply to think about, well, we got to find a solution in West Louisville, that would be the solution. We were more thinking long-term, community-based, sustainable, and really was going to take our community forward. And it really turned out to be very successful. Some of the things, I mean, I think Russ talked about being a theater major. We had people like the Blue Apple Players. We had the Muhammad Ali Center. Lots of partners helped us to make that happen, and it was very successful. And it really demonstrated that we do have a lot of resources in our community, but we frequently operate in silos. So what we had this morning, talking about the Peace Coalition, would be a great way for us to start. And really getting kids out of this notion of, you know, you're in public school, I'm in private, you live in West End, I live in except. Those kinds of things are not necessarily helpful. So I'm going to go on to talk about this. So here's the Louisville data. We saw the world data, and everybody looked very shocked that the 52% of deaths were suicide. But here we are in Louisville, and suicides are higher than homicides for 2009. And this is the best available data we currently have. And again, assaults, i.e. the people who get assaulted, and these are all firearms related, okay? This is not all death. This is just out of firearms. This data we had before we had the incidents. It was part of when we were doing the assessment process. So homicides in 2009 were 35. Suicides were 49. Firearms related. Assaults. And all of these other things that happen. And there are a lot of people who go back and forth. We had the coroner in there. Frequently, they see people who are repeat, frequent flyers almost, as sometimes they call them. The third time, they're probably ending up, you know, they may come in here a few times and then they end up dead the next time. So this is really what's actually happening in our community. And we're using firearms just as an example because people think that it's only guns, but this is what's actually happening. This is what it costs our community. We're spending $12 million per year just in dealing with the firearms-related violence in our community. And if you're the smallest, or nearly one of the smallest, is the actual death. It's the other things, the suicides, the assaults, and all the other things that are really, the repeat follow-up in ER and legal intervention. Attempted suicide, see that number there? That's one of the largest in the middle. So that's really what's happening right here in Dover. And here, again, what it costs our community if we look at it in a different kind of. So assaults are actually costing us the most. That's really what the violence is. We jump up and down when we hear about the death. And not that that death isn't important, but we're not looking at it in a sustainable, systemic kind of a way. We also have a sense of, we think we know where this stuff happens. We don't really. We know what the media tells us, and we know what we think we know, but it's not necessarily the case. In terms of insurance, here's what happens. A lot of them are indigent, so these are those costs that I just showed you. We as a community, so we can't say, oh, what's happened over there, it's nothing to do with us. We as a community are paying for it. The self-pay pot are people who don't have health insurance, but ultimately we end up paying for it in the other sense, in that we might have paid the hospital to do it in a different kind of way. And here are the numbers in terms of homicide. So I've tried to paint the picture before I even got to this, that homicides were not our only issue, but here are homicides. And we can see that it's primarily over in the male section, and there's a significant amount in terms of black males, like tenfold. And this is our community goal for 2010, to have only 3 deaths per 1,000. So we're not even getting to our goals, and we're not necessarily always focusing on what the problem is. The other thing that this says is that there is a big jump from when you get to 15 to 35, 34, this is where a lot of it happens. In each of those years, 3 years of data, here's where we have the biggest problem in that age range. So young adults are where it's happening. And here is, again, in the brown areas are where we have this greatest concentration of homicide. So it tends to say to us, yeah, okay, they're in downtown Louisville and West Louisville, and several other places have homicides. But here, when we look at suicides, it's everywhere. And as we saw, suicides are, in some respects, a bigger problem, except we're culturally we don't report it, we don't talk about it, it's just there. It is all over our community. And this is violence. This too is violence. But we sweep that under the carpet and make it look good. So, here are some numbers, national, and we share these with the young people that we have in the Healing Futures Fellowship. So, again, for young people, we have some significant problems. I probably need to hurry up a little bit. Unintentional injuries are the primary problem that young people have here. So this is all races, both sexes, 15 to 19. Homicides, suicides, quite significant. Again, even for young people at that age. And here's Kentucky as a whole. Just Kentucky, when kids were asked, have they carried a weapon to school? So we heard about bullying a little bit. But up to 35% of kids in Kentucky have taken a weapon to school in the last 30 days. Quite alarming. And here we are in terms of how many have been in a physical fight.
Wow.
And then if you look at emotional support, they felt sad or hopeless. Again, there's a significant amount of that. So this is probably what is generating the suicide. So there's a lot of emotional disturbance. And attempted suicide. nearly 10% of kids have attempted suicide during the last 10 months. So, where do you go from here? I think awareness is one, because every time we show this data, people are very shocked. Because they think they're very familiar with all the issues that we have. But they're, we kind of know half the pie and not the whole of it. Where do we go from here? So again, think local and think global and act local. The preponderance of evidence shows that there's a strong inverse relationship between homicide rates and both economic development and economic inequality. From a public health perspective, this is how we need to start thinking about injury and violence. I said it's a public health issue, so we should think about injury and violence in much the same way. This pyramid shows us where we could have, you can't really see, you can't really see the smallest, the largest impact if we were to change what factors of health have. It's actually the socioeconomic factors that are the primary drivers. So poverty, education, housing, and inequality. Those are the things, if we could fix that, that would really move the dial more than anything else. We need to change the context. So things like, we have great water here in Lowell, so it's usually a good example. So trans fat bans, smoke-free laws, all of those things are the things that we all take for granted. We need to make violence prevention one of the things that we take for granted. So in terms of the social determinants of health, we frequently talk about healthcare, but really 50% of it is actually physical and socioeconomic factors. Clinical care is only 20% of what determines our health. Up to and included, if we include violence, that is also part of it. So that's really where, if we were to have an impact, this is where we need to be working. Not so much in health behaviors. Although, if we think about violence as a behavioral problem, it does go up here. But this is the underlying thing, so that we should get to a point where we live shouldn't determine how long we live. There's something that we usually say, in fact, your zip code is more important to your health than your genetic code. And that's where that comes from. Place matters. So, in terms of the Violence Prevention Work Group, and particularly the Health and Social Wellness Committee, we also took a very public health approach. We shared that data as our starting point with our subcommittee. And we really looked at recommendations that really looked at injury and violence through a public health prevention lens. And we did this primary, secondary, and tertiary approaches. We came up with recommendations. I don't think you can see that very well. We had 4 recommendations in primary prevention, 2 in secondary prevention, and then another 3 over here, for a total of 9. We took that to the public, and we had a public hearing just last week. And then when we asked them to prioritize, we had them vote. These are the kinds of things that they took. These 3 are primary prevention. This one is a secondary prevention model. I'm kind of running out of time, so I'll tell you quickly what these are. The Young Adult Fatality Review Committee, most of you will know that we look into child deaths. There's a lot of research on that. But we've kind of done that, but we don't look at young adults. So remember I showed you that graph, the 15 to 34-year-olds? We are recommended that we replicate that model for young adults so that we start understanding more effectively what is actually happening, what is causing the deaths, where are they coming from, and connecting the dots in a more real way for every death, not just the ones that we think are, One of the things that came up in some of our work was one police commander said that they noted that, and we were sitting at a meeting one morning, and it was probably about 9 o'clock, and there had already been a suicide that morning. And what she was saying was they had noted that, for example, people who end up being in the suicide ledger, part of the ledger, had within the last several weeks received a speeding ticket. Now, we don't know why that is. We can't connect those dots. So right now, it just looks like coincidence. But there's probably more rich data that we could explore to try to, go upstream and do some prevention. But we're not doing it right now because we typically think of those things in a separate column. The ceasefire model is really a problem-oriented problem-oriented policing model that has been very successful in other places. And I think if you were listening to the news this morning, you would have heard that the police chief has just announced the Viper program, which I think is not necessarily the whole deal, but probably replicates a little bit of that. There's a major suicide prevention strategy there as well. And then this one also rose to the top. So you're thinking Nature and Outdoor Stewardship Center? What has that got to do with violence? Well, that particular recommendation is talking about having a regional stewardship center for Western Louisville, where we start looking at providing nature and outdoor leadership and other kinds of opportunities in Western Louisville as one of the solutions. So we're not just looking at kind of gun violence prevention. We're looking at more systemic, more sustainable, more community change and culture change kinds of solutions as one of the models that will help us move forward. So I think I'm a little bit over time. I'm not? Oh, okay. I'm going to go through that quickly. So here they are. So this is the Adult Fatality Review Committee. I think I talked about it quite a bit. So it really looks at the the multidisciplinary approach. We really would have public health, healthcare, medical examiner, community-based services, juvenile and criminal justice, law enforcement, all sitting in a room to try to connect the dots for every single young adult who dies. And it doesn't matter what circumstances in which they die. We need to look at each one of them and to try to understand and connect the dots. That's our goal for that particular one. And here's how it would replicate it. This is what they have. These are the typical objectives for a Child Fatality Review Committee. They look at accurate data, improve communication linkages, improve agency responses, and so we have a good model that we could try to replicate here in Louisville to try to understand that, including the suicide. This is ceasefire. I think I'll skip most of these because I want to get past them. But that's most of what we've been doing in terms of how to look at injury and violence as a public health prevention issue, with the emphasis on primary prevention being our goal. How can we stop this? How can we take it away from being just simply a narrow focus as not our problem, it's in West Louisville, it's people killing each other. We need to really think about how violence infiltrates our community in a very much more systemic way than we currently recognize, and find solutions that would really take us to a point where we could really have not just a week of balance or a day of balance, but a whole year, a day of peace, but a whole year and multiple years where this becomes less common. And that would be really what we could best do to serve our community on this particular day of peace. So. Are there any questions?
Yes, you had mentioned that the new Nature Stewardship Center would be focused on the Western Louisville community. Mm-hmm. Why not focus it to the entire Louisville community? Because there's violence really everywhere.
That's right. Right. I agree with you. That particular solution was started up because, in many respects, I think it would be. It's focused, we're starting it there, and we can see that it could ripple out. But we really wanted to start it there to make it an attraction for people who are in other parts of our nation would have the opportunity to go and experience it and see it. It would become the leadership center for that kind of work in our community. Because typically we've been doing, our community has been growing east for many years. And everybody thinks that anything good has to come from the east. I think if we could have something that's an attractor that would bring, I think part of the goal is to engage teachers in schools, to take kids to the center. I think right now the plan is to reuse a building that's in Shawnee Park, for example. People would have the opportunity to understand parks and understand nature for its own. And the goal too also is to make it a center where people can take that learning back to their neighborhood, back to their park, so that they could use their park in their vicinity as the best, as a way of learning that process. Yeah?
Dr. Arno, I just want to commend you for that initiative, and that exact answer that you just gave is that I think it's genius to say, wouldn't it be great if we knew more about everything west of 9th Street, and if we felt that we could go there and we were curious and we want to be like them, right? So that idea of it's an attraction is really a smart thing. And I would just add to that I think it'd be great to see other kinds of events, things like races, running, foot races, walks, things along those lines, that are about being out in the world and thinking about health and fitness and body and mind connections at the same time that we're exploring and learning about our community. And so our Ali Center, here on campus, or Ali Institute, I should say, I thought it was really a nice thing that we started having, ideally an annual event that will take people out that way and have us literally walking the street. The streets are ours, right?
Yeah.
We happen to have the organizer of that race here. James, you said, do you want to tell us a little bit about the Ollie Shuffle?
I don't think I have too much time. I'll just say that we'll be doing it again this year. It's
April 13th.
That's our director as well from the Muhammad Ali Institute. But yeah, we'll be having the event again, and it really is an event that we developed to really engage cross-community involvement. The tagline was connecting communities one step at a time, and the goal was to start at the West End School where Muhammad Ali went to grade school, and end at the hit certain checkpoints throughout his life on the way that are relevant and that are in the city, and end at the Muhammad Ali Center downtown. And the route itself connected the West End and the downtown epicenter, and we had a really good showing the first year and had a lot of different people from different communities, and a lot of people liked it. So definitely do it again.
Thank you.
I think that the nature idea is excellent. In the past years, we have had active recreational programs with our parks. I think including that in our parks would be excellent to get nature as a program. And since we do not have the programs we once had, children are not involved as much as they should be. And when they have no money for parents to pay for these interventions, that becomes a problem. And I think one of the major problems is that our children do not have enough activities. And that's across Louisville, in the West End. And we need to say to the mayor, we need to do more for our children and teens in this community, because everything has been closed down. The youth department for the city has been closed down. The recreation in the park closed down. And, our future are our children.
Right.
And we need to put some pressure on the council and the mayor.
So I think what you said is right, and I think that the Muhammad Ali walk, what was the title? Shuffle. That's right. Cross-community kinds of conversations and engagement. In fact, that's really was the premise. I went over it very quickly. The Healing Futures Fellowship program that we did in the summer. That was the very essence and what we wanted to achieve with that, of bringing kids from all walks of Louisville. So we were actually very humbled by the number of applications. It was actually quite heartbreaking to have to turn so many kids away. But we selected some kids, and we really ran with it. We kind of put it together very, very quickly, and we had a lot of community engagement and community partners. The Muhammad Ali Center taught some conflict resolution. So we tried to put everything in those programs. And our goal is to graduate healing ambassadors, so that those kids go back after having that experience to their neighborhoods, to their schools, to their churches, where they live, learn, work, play, and all of those things, and pray. to be those ambassadors. It actually connects a little bit too with some work that we funded out of the Anne Braden Institute, which was the Healing History Academy.
Right.
And so then we had the Healing Futures Fellowship, and you can see how it's kind of looking backwards and looking forwards, working with what you just said. Kids are really our future. And I had as the tagline, teach them well and let them lead the way, because that is really the only thing we can do at this point. Instead of thinking of, West Global, that's the end of that, there's no solution. I think we really need kids to learn more. We already have integrated schools, but they're not necessarily giving kids the opportunities as they might to tour the community, to share with each other in a non-academic setting, to do a lot of things together for a full summer, 6 weeks. And it was in fact, it was also great at the end of the program, the last day, we had kids getting up and saying, wow, what a powerful experience it was. And so it really gave us the impetus of, we got to do it next year. So you'll hear from us about that. And we want to also do a longitudinal kind of a study to figure out how this transforms kids. So we did not look for kids who were the cream of the crop. We took kids that were all kinds of levels of experience. Some kids, so it really was a mix. And then they just bonded together. We spent a week in Jefferson Memorial Forest as a team building. We did ropes courses and stuff. So these kids, none of them had known each other before. We did not. We specifically would not take, 2 kids from this school who were friends. We took kids who didn't know each other, and then they worked through that process, and then they presented their recommendations to the mayor on the 27th of August as to what they think the solutions ought to be for young people. And some of the things that were said here were repeated. We need more things to do and those kinds of things.
I think all the work that the recommendations are all good. But that economic piece is just so critical, because at the end of the day, that's what separates, on the other side of Main Street is that economic divide. I mean, why was that a different, committee?
Well, I shared with you because my charge was to talk about injury and violence as a public health issue, and so I shared with you what the Health and Wellness Committee worked on, and we had 9 recommendations, and I shared with you the top 4. The others will go forward. There was also an economic development committee. There was a community rebuilding committee. There was a adolescent and criminal justice committee. How many have I gone through now? There were 5. Education, that's right. Were you on the education committee? That's correct. Okay. So I've also seen Tom in multiple meetings over the last couple of weeks as we've gone to these committees. So that you're going to see, in fact, if you go to Blaine Hudson, who is currently off on leave as the dean of the school, is the actual chair. And if you go on the Saturday Academy and you click on the West Global Work Group, you'll see all the committees and all of their recommendations. One committee had 21 recommendations, so we have to roll all of those up and give the final report to the mayor. But I see that. Is that a hand up or a hook?
No.
Okay.
There was so much information to digest. I want to have the PowerPoint slide to study it. But one comment that you made early, Dr. Arno, was really interesting to me. We think we know where violence happens. And later you had the statistics of the perpetrators and focused on ages and also black males. And my question or my challenge is this. I think what I see on the news and what my assumption is that violence is caused by young black men. And I wish we had information on other communities, both in the United States that are primarily Caucasian and in other countries that also in urban environments have violence, that could disaggregate this confusion that we have between economics and ethnicity, because often people live like with like. So my question is, how do we understand the economic, which was at the base of your one triangle, is really a predominant factor in this country where we see so much through a racial lens? How do we distinguish the two? Because we want to see ourselves as a classless society as well. How do we see where it really is happening and not just the appearance?
Well, I think there are multiple things that are contributing to that number where we saw, and I think at one point, I think when I had my slide and it said, where do we go from here? One of the things that we heard, and if we could have the whole committee, maybe the whole violence prevention committee, one of the things they talked about was the whole war on drugs, for example. Now that number that we saw there, I suspect is connected, the number with the black males is connected with the war on drugs, is connected with the economics, is connected with the incarceration, is connected with once you, particularly in Louisville, and which is why I think it was really great for us to have that restorative justice piece that we heard earlier today. That it becomes, it's not so much a war on drugs, but it's what it's become. It's been a mill where once you get caught up in that first attempt or whatever, you are in there, you can't, after that, you've got a record, you can't get a job, and therefore you have your economic problem, and therefore you have no alternative, and therefore you get also physically segregated in some parts of our community, because we live in a culture where in some multiple, I mean our urban planning again, we have subdivisions where you're only allowed to build a house, I mean most of the subdivisions here, you're only allowed to build a house of this amount of square footage. And that, by its definition, it means that you cannot have people of all income levels living next door to each other. So what we have is a very segregated community by income primarily. But because of our historic racial distortions, it also shows up as racial segregation and resegregation as we go along. And so these things keep perpetuating themselves. So when we talk about, you talk about interest and how interest grows, and if you look at even wealth in our community, and if I thought about it, there could be another slide to show the difference in terms of wealth for black Americans and white Americans. Most people don't know that after the war, the GI Bill, for the most part, is what has funded the white suburbs. And blacks, for the most part, were excluded from getting those loans. And as we all know, our house has been the primary location of most wealth. And so you're really talking about, it's one thing to have, if your $1 grows even at 100% per year, and $100, even if you have the same percentage increase, your $1 will be $2 next year, and your $100 over here will be $200. And so that's part of what it is. And so it's a continuous process that really goes back to those historic injustices that continue to perpetuate themselves, and they show up. We all think, well, we now have a black president, it's now a post-racial society, but the economic structures and all of those underpinnings of it continue to give us what we have today that shows up looking like, here we are. Well, no wonder. The data says that all black men are the problem, therefore it's okay for when the police sees the black guy, just, as the story you gave this morning, it feels like that. So it feels as if you have a justification on the one hand, but really you never look at the, go upstream and look at the root cause.
I want to say something else. There is a neighbor on my street, and last week he told me something, and this man is probably 55 or near 60. He jumps. He said every week, see, a lot of it is how people are penalized. Every week he says that he is stopped by the police 4 to 5 times. And this has been happening 5 years. He just told me I'm getting ready to write a letter to the mayor because I stay on the pulse of what's happening in the community. That's ridiculous. And I know that a lot of young men, African American men, are also penalized by the police. I often sit at 4th and Broadway and catch a bus. Sometimes in the winter I'm up in the corner because I'm cold. Young black guys will be standing on the curb and the police will come and harass them. When they see me, they leave. But see, there is a lot going on in this community that's not right. A lot of young white guys are also penalized if they're dressed a certain way. And, we've got to deal with that. I hope the Violence Committee will talk about what is happening. And once kids are penalized and have nobody to fight for them, they are caught up in a structure where they weren't even guilty, but they see no way out.
So these are really hard problems. I mean, it's very difficult for us to figure out an easy solution. But a lot of it is concentrated poverty. And some of the structures that we have in place that reinforce those problems rather than solve them. So I would say we just need to move forward. I saw a hand going up, and I think the hook is about.
Yeah, the hook is because I want to thank Dr.